Good morning. This is the AHLA Speaking of Health Law podcast. My name is Emmy Trende, and I am the Chief Legal Officer and General Counsel of the United Network for Organ Sharing. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Michelle Brennfleck, who is chair of our AHLA Academic Medical Centers and Teaching Hospitals Practice Group, where I'm also part of the leadership group. And Michelle recently authored the article Cybersecurity Developments in 2025. So, Michelle, when you're not volunteering for AHLA, tell us a little bit about your practice at Buchanan Ingersoll.
Well, thanks, Emmy, so much for having me this morning. It's great to be with you. My practice is broad ranging. I advise clients, including academic medical centers, teaching hospitals, health systems, physician practices on a variety of issues ranging from strategic transactions to thorny regulatory fraud and abuse matters. And I also have a subset expertise in data privacy and cybersecurity, which is why I'm here speaking with you today. So thanks again for having me.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for taking the time and talking with us this morning. I wanted to start with a question. Today, in the information economy and the cyber world being what it is, information data is everywhere. Why do you think that the healthcare industry in particular remains such a high target for threat actors?
Thanks, Emmy. It really does. I think, we continue to hear in our day-to-day practice how healthcare is a key target of threat actors and cyber criminals. I think it really is for three reasons. One is the sensitive data at issue. Two is the potential for operational disruption of healthcare providers and other stakeholders. And then three is the significant harm that can be posed to individuals when their information is at risk. So if we think about that first item, the sensitive data at play, healthcare is powered by data. We saw in the Change Healthcare attack that occurred in early 2024 that estimated 190 million individuals were impacted. That number is actually up from a prior estimate of 100 million. And that 190 million is 2.5 times the number of people that were impacted by the second largest data breach. So that's a lot of data, and that's one incident. So we, of course, have the sensitive health information, in the form of medical records at play. But then more attractive to threat actors is the social security numbers, the financial information that may be housed within those records. And threat actors know that. They know that that information may be sellable on the black market. They also know that providers, insurers, clearinghouses, and others may be more inclined to pay ransomware in order to get that data back as best they can, or at least to get operations back up and running. So again, that data is the driver, and healthcare is just a huge source, a gold mine of that type of information. We also then see that there is the potential for operational disruption and impact. So of course, if a health system has their electronic medical record system breached, that can cause the system to delay or pause, suspend, need to reschedule procedures, which of course can put patients at risk and can cause providers to be less productive. And again, threat actors know that and seek to capitalize upon that disruption, again, in an effort to, for example, have their ransomware paid. With the Change Healthcare breach, again, turning back to that, we saw that for weeks there was delay in revenue cycle management and claims processing, and we're still continuing to see the ripple effects of that today. That matter is still under investigation, but more importantly, we're still, continuing to see that there is litigation and an attempt to recover, again, from those whose claims payment was significantly disrupted. And then third, we see that there, is significant risk on an individual level. First and foremost, from a patient care perspective, potentially, again, if there is a disruption in the ability of a healthcare provider to provide care or to be paid for the care. But also you and I and everyone who receives healthcare, we have so much of our data that is out in the universe. And again, threat actors can seek to access that information and use it for their own gain. So there's risk of, identity theft and, again, credit monitoring and other methods of mitigating risk are essential and important to safeguard that information. But once it's lost and is in the hands of a bad actor, it in many ways is not possible to get it back. So again, I think that, healthcare is just a treasure trove of information for cyber criminals, threat actors, and organizations really need to be mindful of how best to protect it.
Excellent. Well, with that in mind, I mean, the healthcare space is constantly innovating, and the only innovators that are keeping pace with that, I would say, are the threat actors who are trying to come up with new ways all the time. They're learning from each of these cyber attacks and improving and getting ready for the next wave of trying to attack our vulnerabilities that we won't anticipate. And with all that in mind, it paints a really intimidating picture. The numbers that you just talked about are really heart-stopping. What can we do, and what can providers and what can the attorneys who are advising them right now do to try to anticipate that next level of threat?
And that's a great question, and it's a really challenging one. I think first and foremost, my recommendation is for organizations to try to get a handle on what data it is that they house. And that's a very easy, recommendation to state. And it's much more difficult for organizations to implement. So, we frequently work with organizations that are engaging in data mapping exercises to see, what data is coming into their systems, what is that data doing as it's flowing through their various systems, and then how is it leaving their system. So I think that data mapping exercise is key because organizations can't adequately protect data that they may not know they have. So that's, first and foremost, a recommendation. Second, we often work with organizations that are developing policies and procedures around data management and risk assessment. And it's crucial that those policies and procedures be living and breathing documents that are not, stuck up on a shelf or, in this electronic age sitting in a database. So organizations need to not only have those policies and procedures, but know how to implement them. So training and education is key with respect to, making those policies and procedures really live and breathe. Organizations also can benefit from security risk assessments. Certainly that is, again, one of those easier said than done undertakings. We often see success in organizations that have penetration testing or stress testing done. So they may hire an outside consultant that sort of puts on the hat of the threat actor or the cyber criminal and tries to access the systems of the organization and to identify vulnerabilities within that system. So, in my mind, what better safeguard against the threat actor or a cyber criminal than having, someone with IT expertise try to act in that role and penetrate the system and then identify vulnerabilities. We also see that trainings in the form of tabletop exercises are crucial. So those involve organizations taking a hypothetical data security incident or a breach and running through what to do in the event that occurs within their organization. So that may involve folks from the administrative, legal, IT, and security teams, as well as communications that can work together to go through a mock exercise and sort of learn from, what went well, what did not go well. And I've seen organizations, a huge difference in organizations that have worked through an incident response plan and performed a tabletop exercise versus those that have not, and perhaps when an event occurs, are not as coordinated as they might be in real time.
We just went through a tabletop and in my organization at UNOS, and it was absolutely an invaluable experience. It's one thing to have the plan on paper, but to
Right.
have everyone really testing it in an environment of live dialogue where you have everyone active and present and committed to issue spotting up front, I can see how it's just such a tremendous asset for anyone. So fully agree with you on those pieces of advice.
And
You
I would just also chime in to say, often in the heat of the moment, so you'll have the incident response that's sort of the, heat of the moment, what to do, perhaps to operationalize, get back up and running after an incident or a breach. But then the dust does settle. And we frequently encourage organizations in that period where perhaps the, immediate threat has been resolved. Perhaps law enforcement has been contacted and is assisting in an investigation or is running an investigation of its own. There's often a period of time, again, when the dust has settled and an organization is looking to assess, what happened here? What individuals were impacted? What data do we have at issue? Looking through perhaps with a forensic firm, what happened here? What's going on? And I often encourage organizations really to try to pause during that investigation that follows, the immediate incident, and to determine, has there actually been a breach? And we have this conversation with organizations time and time again where, there's been this bad event, and everyone assumes that that bad event is a breach that is a HIPAA defined breach that will lead to individual notifications. And I do encourage, working with counsel, working with the IT folks to really get at what happened here, what's going on, because there may be a low probability of compromise to the information at issue. And, HIPAA doesn't allow many graces, but it does have the low probability of compromise, get out of Dodge in the event that there's been an incident that doesn't rise to the level of a breach. So I really encourage organizations to take a beat and work with counsel to go through that analysis, because it may end up safeguarding them from making notifications to individuals and then dealing with the, often fallout of those notifications in the form of class action lawsuits and, even just the bad press that may come from notifications to many individuals.
Absolutely. Those are well-known side effects, unfortunately, and fully agree with consulting with counsel to see how extensive your response has to be in the event that you do experience one of these attacks. I wanted to circle back a minute. You touched for a moment on the Change Healthcare ransomware attack, and in response to that, the Health Infrastructure Security and Accountability Act, or HISA, was introduced as proposed legislation to increase the government oversight in cybersecurity over covered entities and business associates, those categories that are subject to HIPAA. Now, looking at that legislation, it emphasizes the importance of an annual cyber risk assessment. And to a lot of folks who are impacted, that might be a new term. Can you just give an overview of what a cyber risk assessment is and what would a typical cyber risk assessment look like?
Of course. So HISA is sort of a modernization of HIPAA, and it is still in its proposed form. And, I would caution all the folks who may be listening to keep an eye on it, because we'll see what appetite legislators and the regulatory agencies have to, move ahead with HISA under this new administration, given that there may be priorities, in different areas. But again, HISA would seek to modernize HIPAA and to formalize much of what we've talked about already. So we've talked about, these security risk assessments, looking at, stress testing and penetration testing and identifying where an organization may have vulnerabilities. HISA would essentially formalize those processes. So these, annual cyber audits would be, again, sort of a formalization of what we already are seeing in this space as best practices, with now under HISA, potentially, I should say, with regulatory oversight, with the support of the government, and ultimately with an eye not only to protect individual information, but also national security. And I would anticipate that that would continue to be a focus under this administration, given our relations with other countries and threats that, may be coming from abroad. Again, what we would see under HISA, if it moves forward, is essentially a formalization and additional regulatory oversight over what many organizations are already doing from a best practice perspective. But I say that and, acknowledge that there are many organizations that are under-resourced, that may not have the capital required to really get behind a security campaign, and, to engage in these significant upgrades to what they may have in the way of security safeguards. So with that, the HISA as proposed did account for funding opportunities for rural organizations and others that may not have, the deep pockets that would be required to move into compliance with HISA. And again, we'll see, where that funding, where those funding sources may be under the new administration if HISA does move forward.
Great. Very good advice. And thank you for that overview. Also, you also mentioned the recent administration change, causing a few ripples and some anticipatory anxiety, probably. Now that President Trump has taken office, have you seen any recent developments in reproductive health care or protection of protected health information, PHI, or do you have any predictions of what might be coming down the pike in those areas?
That's a great question. And, sort of a real-time answer is that we're continuing to work with our clients on how to best approach these issues. So you may be aware that in the summer of 2024, really in response to the Dobbs decision, which overturned Roe v. Wade, there was an update to HIPAA, to the privacy rule, that would seek to protect reproductive health information and essentially to prohibit the use or the disclosure of HIPAA protected health information, or PHI, in furtherance of an investigation dealing with a reproductive health issue and, an individual's accessing of reproductive health care, provision of reproductive health care, payment for reproductive health care. And again, it was sort of HIPAA's angle at protecting that information in those settings. So the final rule did go into effect, and we have been counseling organizations on compliance with the final rule, particularly from a policies and procedures perspective. One aspect of the final rule that does not become effective until February 2026 at this point is a required update to organizations' notices of privacy practices, where they would be required to include, information about the use and disclosure of reproductive health information. So what we've done in that setting, again, because that portion of the final rule doesn't become effective until February of 2026 and, may, under this new administration, undergo change, we've worked with organizations to put that updated language in their NPPs, but also to include some language that would allow it to be, stricken without impacting other components of the NPP in the event that there is a change in the guidance that in connection with the new administration. So we've sort of been working with clients to approach these changes in a reasonable way, to sort of get ahead of them, but also to acknowledge that that the new administration and its priorities may shift the way that these NPPs in particular are structured.
Great. So time for everyone to dust off those NPPs if you have not done so already. That's a great place to start. Well, thank you very much, Michelle, for taking the time this morning to give a great high-level sneak peek of the detailed article. If you'd like to follow up, please take the time and read Michelle's article, Cybersecurity Developments in 2025, where you can get a greater glimpse into sort of those top 10 hot button issues. There were probably 10 more that occurred just since we've been recording this, but certainly a very attractive and interesting area to practice in right now. So, Michelle, thank you for taking the time with us, and everyone have a great day.
Thanks so much, Emmy. Great to be with you this morning. Take care.